Running commentary. We are listening to albums all the way through. We took Queen's debut album, and these were our findings. On the cover of this record is a lone figure on a stage, seemingly to the bottom right. It's a shapely young man wearing what looks like a very form-fitting leotard, which would certainly tie in with Freddie Mercury's wardrobe choices. And the hair is shoulder length, and it's got this beautiful sort of purple kind of cover. Very, very luxuriant, very just not what was happening, though, in England in 1973. It was a little bit more pronounced, a little bit more egotistical, if glam rock was this showy, upfront thing where you didn't hide your identity. So it was almost as though this Queen record didn't want to be discovered. It was more for their benefit than for ours. It's ahead of its time. There's nothing else around that is like it. And so it sits kind of by itself as this avant-garde piece of work with a group of musicians who are finding themselves in the studio. The album starts out with Keep Yourself Alive, and this is the track that is recognized by Queen's fans as being the most standout track on the album, a classic Queen track. I can't say the same is true for me. High points for me come later in the album. It doesn't necessarily strike me as necessarily one of their best works, but it is definitely something that you'd instantly hear it and know it was Queen. There's sort of a sense of each instrument doing its job, voice, drums, less so with the bass, but the guitar is definitely a huge feature on this first record. It goes into things like Great King Rat and My Fairy King. I have to tell you that I would describe this first album as rather like being in the ocean. You want to go in this direction and you want to be walking straight ahead, but the current of the work takes you in a different direction. This is an album that just takes you into its current and you are just on a journey to the point where the tracks kind of all blend into one with a few notable exceptions, which we will go into. Liar is the first track that really hit me about the head. There's all of these phrases that he uses. I'm this, liar. I'm that, liar. It's such a brave thing to say. And it's also the way he's saying it to himself. So he's like, I'm this, liar. But he's calling himself a liar. The Night Comes Down. I don't know what separates this track from the rest of the album. As I say, it's a concept rock. They're taking their cues from, I'm guessing, sort of more of a Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath kind of route. I am overwhelmed by the levels of levels. There are levels within the guitar playing. There are levels within the production of this record. It is almost impossible to try and explain the amount of work that has gone into this record. And this is their debut effort. They have a sense of mystique about them. There's a sense of mystery. Modern times rock and roll, and it's Roger Taylor that's singing. And that's a different departure. His voice is different. It's not the theatrical kind of instrument that Freddie Mercury uses. It's a more kind of traditional rock vocal. All of the members of Queen contributed significantly to the making of this record. Son and Daughter comes on. It's part of this wave. I'm not able really to separate these tracks distinctively in as much as it just feels to me like a passage of music with apart from the sections that I isolate. Jesus is another big track that stands out through its audacity. Its reach, it's reaching you in a way that the other tracks feel more like they've been given names and then sort of sliced into sections. And the kicker on this eponymous debut is that you are given about a minute and a half of Queen's top 10 first hit, which is Seven Seas of Rye. It's this twinkling piano which has all of this kind of rhythm and power, but they only give you a minute and a half of it at the end of the first album. I have to tell you that there's so much information to share with you. There's just simply, I consider myself to be somebody that's very able with the language and very articulate. I'm usually able to articulate what I feel about music and what I feel about performers and what it is they're doing and songs. This is one of these situations where you sit there and it just, this is what it is. It's Peter Murphy in that chair in the Maxell tape. And you just let the music take you. You don't care the name of the song. And remember, this is a one listen review. Now, if I were to go back and to review this album and to look at the different tracks and then to really get into who wrote what and who did what and when it was, I could break it down. But I will tell you right now, in doing that, I would completely destroy the magic of this record. There is magic here. It's not fully developed. The witches and wizards involved do not know the power of their wands at this time. I want to just talk about some of the other things that are involved that we don't know about Queen. For example, their logo is a combination of their various zodiacs. There are 2 lions, which are the 2 Leos in the band. There is a crab, which sits in the center, which is the Cancer. And then the 2, of course, fairy girls are Virgo, which is Freddie Mercury's sign. Sat behind that is a phoenix, which stands shadowing over the 4 star signs. And passing resemblance, there's also a Q with flames rising above it. This was the logo to the band. It was the crest of the band and bore a passing resemblance to the royal coat of arms for the United Kingdom. This was a really well thought out concept. Queen just did not walk into this and say, oh, we're going to put a bunch of tracks together randomly. There was a thought process. There was a journey. The name Queen, just think of what it represents. Queen. Who runs the country in England? The Queen. What's another Queen another word for? A queen is another word for a homosexual, and particularly at that time. It's a sort of a derogatory term for a homosexual. And a lot of this had to do with how Freddie Mercury thought of himself, as we'll see in later work. Sexuality and rock and roll were really Freddie Mercury's mission here. He wanted to go into rock and roll as a flaming homosexual. I think he went in there to kind of upset the stereotypes that existed in rock and roll at that time. You don't think of Black Sabbath and any of these bands that were around, any of the concept bands. No one's sitting around thinking, oh, Led Zeppelin's a bunch of queens. It is just almost impossible to review this album in one way or another because you are put on the spot of all of this immense and immeasurable talent. And you do feel, when you are in the presence of great talent, you feel almost unable to review it. I give this album a solid 87%. There are not many artists who leave you wanting more.